We continue with Quintessential Paladin following the quest of the First Crusade. We have reached Constantinople, and from there we have gotten permission to move into Turkey. The land of the Turk wasn't always the land of the Turk. It was known as Pergamum and Anatolia before then. We are going to be ferried across the Bosporus. We met with the emperor's daughter, Anna Comnena, and she seems fascinated by Crusaders, mostly because she has never left the palace grounds and wonders why anyone will leave their homes at all. Yet she's a historian and knows the war will be a significant event. Her father, the Emperor Alexius, agrees to treat the advance guard of the pilgrims as friends and offers them barracks in Asia Minor. Frankly, he's just trying to get rid of this mob, and rightly so. The ferry crossing takes almost a week, and stragglers and new outside groups continue to arrive even as we are trying to get the ones we have in. It's just a logistical nightmare. The Germans, Gorshok and Orel, are still raiding happily in Serbia up here to the north. My brother Bart and the Swabians under Emich von Leninger travel with us into Anatolia. We are the poor people of Christ, as we are being called by ourselves. Tafur for everyone else, the unwashed, the unclean, the Expendables. I am Peter the Hermit. I continue to play Peter the Hermit. I will lead the Peregrini Christi with the NPC soak-offs of Alexander Noshan and David the Houndsman, and I also have 2 of these Fostering Faith, which I can use to repeat a dice roll that I find bad, and that would hopefully protect my destined status, which is adding 1 to my dice rolls here. Very important aspect of the game. So where are we at? Well, I'm with Alexander and David the Houndsman, and together we're going to cross the Strait of the Bosporus, and we are going to go to a base at Sevatot, and we occupy an abandoned army encampment there where our women, our children, and our sick individuals might rest.
Alexander had a festering foot. He lost his massive warhorse, has since discarded that barding, yet he refused to shed his spurs. Well, he has now. No one should be walking in spiked heels. I'm not talking about scratching the inn floor, nor how they trip you up grabbing on stones. No, the spurs will chafe, misalign, then snap your ankle. Devilish contraptions. Never good for the horse, even less so for a foot soldier. Let's take a look at spurs for a second. The stirrup was invented in antiquity, the Assyrians. Those marauders had them, but Dark Age Europe was slow to adapt. Only finally in the 7th century did saddles attach with holsters to support your feet. This greatly aided in steering the animal and staying on in warfare. But what it truly gave was the ability to stand, lean into mount's front, and thereby straighten the back at the lance strike. All the power of the legs could be utilized by this simple innovation. The stirrup gave the armored knight everything for which he was feared. All that moving weight, the momentum of charging, the impact force transferred into the small armor-piercing iron tip. The victim died. Many victims were skewered. The horse and rider did not stop on the first impact. Horsemen rode down row after row of defenders. That assumes that anyone would stand lock knee and front forward when faced by such attack. Braveheart aside, the spear wall was only good against a frontal charge. The stirrup gave the rider the ability to pivot, circle, raise up the beast, and stamp. The armored animal's hooves were just as deadly as that lance. The horse was even trained to kick backward on command. It was easier not to tumble off with the stirrups. Now Alexander was shuffling about shoeless except for his honey-bandaged wrap.
So let's make a roll to establish a base. I move over onto my table here, my refs page. I will roll under Kingly Deliberations to establish my base. So 1 dice 6. And here comes my roll, a 2. A 2 is I need to defeat a Dark Knight. It would have been worse if I was on Pious Quest. I defeated Dark Knight, so I'm going to just call this Dark Knight a situation where I will be battling not with any force of arms. I doubt there's some knight that steps forward and says we need to move on. It won't be another attack by Emich von Leninger. Instead, this Dark Knight will represent almost a scourge, that we need to prevent a scourge here, circumvent a scourge here of the difficulties in trying to get hospitals set up and barracks set up and find provisions. So one dark night, an equivalent of dice roll in true freestyle fashion, we can turn combat into an intellectual or work exercise. And here comes my roll of 2d6. And I am destined status, so that's going to be a roll of a 7 and a 1. I wish I could figure out how to stop this from generating add up. It's probably because I'm using this shortcut here. But okay, so I rolled a 7, and that gives me a mighty result, which means I've easily completed the work base that I'm working on. Now the Swabians, technically under my command, or even under the command of my brother Bartholomew, are unhappy by the delay waiting for their place on the ferry. Some even suggest that their forces could swim the strait, and they probably could, although not with all their gear. The mercenaries start to steal anything they can find from the aristocratic household outside of Constantinople. The ruling elite live secluded in the city center. Frankly, the nobles of Constantinople don't care about anyone but themselves, and the greed-driven Swabians go as far as to take the lead tiles off the roof of a church. Now, what are they going to do with lead tiles off the roof of a church? What are they going to do with that extra weight? The people are just ridiculous. It's almost a form of kleptomaniac that's infected the Crusaders.
I had my first good laugh in an age. Emich von Leninger was furious as he chastised his soldiers. They had desecrated a church, Eastern Orthodox, one of many here in Constantinople. Some of his troopers thought the metal roof of that church must be hiding true gold. Even as they pulled off the shingles and scraped them with knives, they could not be convinced that somewhere inside these tiles was a geld filling. Again, the weight. Gewicht, Gewicht, they repeated as if saying the word heavy had a magical property. Emich berated, shoved, threatened blows with the pommel of his sword. Gewicht, Gewicht. All his anger did not make his men hide what they continued to do. Emich stormed off. His Swabians went right back to climbing ladders and tossing the lead tiles down into the street. Because they did not shatter, they must be precious. I made my way with Alexander to the spot of Alexius's ferry ride across the Bosporus.
But after we get across, we can take stock of our enemy here, and we now are officially, if I can get my officially moved across into just in the very edge of modern-day Turkey here. We still got a lot of area to cover, but we're right here at the edge of, and now officially in the Turkish-controlled lands at least. The mercenaries have stolen, as I've said. We get across. The Emperor's General Nicetas, he's still in play as well, instructs us to just stand fast and wait until the more seasoned knights and men-at-arms arrive. The Normans and Robert, the son of William the Conqueror, is coming, and Adhemar, the bishop who received the Pope's cross to officially start the Crusades. All those knights, true soldiers, will be coming mostly by boat to arrive in Constantinople. Even now, some are trickling in. Do we take the good advice of Nicetas? No, he was the one that fled the city of Ni. We're going to go on our own. We decide to continue our actions just like we did in Europe. At least here, we will be mostly raiding Turkish farms or former Byzantine farms that were captured by the Turks some 10 years ago. Unfortunately, we also rob other Christian pilgrims, people who have no part in our cause. They're just a wrong place and wrong time, mostly harmless people of the book, as the Muslims would call them, and they are going to face persecution from their own faith and the Muslim faith. Now, my packs, the plebs, I use those terms interchangeable, we're going to try to build a base camp and improve the moats around Sevatot. Alexander stays behind to supervise the work while I move out in support of my brother Bard. The Houndsman David, a ferocious man who travels with 2 Great Danes, orders all who can still walk to assemble for roll call tomorrow or be set on by his dogs.
A drape from a palanquin, velvet curtains, and fine gilded frame parted and a nose poked out. The fellow inside, being carried by 8 lackeys, had a complaint and wished to speak with the person in charge. I told David to see what he wanted. The noble identified himself as an earl. He had taken a vow of poverty on the death of his wife and 7 sons. Not total poverty from the conveyance he rode. He was on pilgrimage to the holy city to atone. His loss was grave, all would agree, but David was in little mood to hear of another's troubles. The Earl, former, continued. His attendants lost their wagon, all their provisions, all of his clothing. He was angry and wanted these belongings back. David took off his own hat and gave it to the man. He didn't want a peasant's cap. He wanted his things. David shrugged. How was this his problem? The man insisted that we took his cart. David put back on his cap and answered the charge. So what? We took your cart. That was wrong? Back on your lands, maybe so, but your cart crossed paths with my army. Spoils are spoils. Finding the exact company responsible, finding his belongings intact, was not possible. Look around. Do you see your cart? The drapes closed and the noble continued on his way at a quick march. David gave me a pause as he wondered if the man's family died of plague.
Now this is September, the harvest can be brought in, and thousands are starting to march inland, and we pass through several Christian villages and commandeer their entire harvest, leaving them with nothing to eat for the winter. We are absolutely merciless, and we even massacre peasants that refuse to surrender their crops.
Image confiscated another harvest even as the peasants held wooden crosses and swore to be good Christians. The act could condemn the whole to starving. I asked if we might not share, take just half, or I'll get by with a third. We'll need this and far more, came his reply. He also stated emphatically, the math is tragic. That village of 200 may eat well for a year from a good harvest, but we are tens of thousands, and the food we forage will hardly last even a day. We'll need 100 pious harvests to get us to Jerusalem. Who deserved to starve more? Neither of us wanted that puzzle solved. They are welcome to join us, become a few more of the multitude that eat day by day. See what happens tomorrow. I will not depend on manna from heaven. I wondered if this village was the All-Father's bounty set in the desert before us. David started a poem as the men marched off with the granary sacks. Rally! A criminal calls. Harried horsemen stumble on corpses. Who remains of my warriors?
But I need to roll another die here on Pious Quest, because I'm a pious man, of course. I cannot just steal. No, what this would represent is, again, how many people are going to fight back saying, you just can't take my grain. I roll a d6. I get a 5 on Pious Quest. I need to circumvent a scourge to foster Fae. And just so that I don't have any forget for that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assume. Should I assume and make an ass out of you and me? I'm going to go ahead and assume that I will successfully complete this. How about if I delete it later if I don't? And pick up a third fostering Fae. But I get to defeat a Scourge. Now, a Scourge I can do with tests of prowess, and I'm a man of justice, so that's going to be easy for me. And I'm going to roll 2 dice, and I'm going to take the higher of those 2 dice, and I'm going to add 1 to it. And I got a 4 and a 6. Easy peasy game until it's not. And I get a 6, which becomes a 7 with my destined status, and I can circumvent a Scourge. So I have dealt with the fact that we are collecting crops from the villagers. I've reconciled that. Now, Image Count of Leninger, he starts to assign captured lands in Turkey to subordinates. He's setting up shop here. He's building himself a fiefdom. And Alexius, the emperor of Constantinople, it seems like he's just replacing one intruder for another. Image wants specifically the lands near Nicaea, and he even says we need to remember our creed. Now, the Nicene Creed, that's the basis of all Catholic faith. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all that can be seen and unseen. These are powerful notions, and they drive the Crusaders to move back to capture the sepulchre. I'm going to pronounce it like 6 different ways. Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ, is the ultimate goal of the Crusaders, to capture the Holy Tomb in Jerusalem. So of all people I thought I'd never see again, I crossed paths with Walter Pousset. He was a former leader of the Peregrini Christi, and he still expects to take part of my own force or all of my pilgrims for his army.
I was consulted as to which parcel I would have. I said none. My home will be in the Holy City. Sure, but a man's estates might be far-flung. Walter Pousset said he would take the area bounded by the river, including 2 villages near the Bosporus. Image shrugged. The places had already been looted and were being depopulated. Take them as you please. I was struck mouth wide, waiting for an explanation or any excuse to duel. Walter merely smiled at me and nodded. The land of milk and honey seems arid. Walter proclaimed himself a baron. He wondered if anyone knew of a herald to make the title official. The land itself needed to be renamed. These eastern places had too many vowels and not enough guttural consonants for any of our tongues to truly pronounce. Sias. It's just sad. I will call my domain Salvation, Hosanna in the highest. The place was more mud than mountain.
Walter Pousset states that I'm a baron here, recently appointed. As for the money he stole from me, there's no telling. He probably was taken to him the same way he took it from me. And I'm going to make a die roll of kingly deliberations here to figure out what exactly Walter Pousset is looking for. I go back to my refs page. Kingly deliberations. Let me roll a die there. 1 die 6. And it is a 3. Gain a critical deed to foster fate, yet lose my plot armor. Now, is this a point where I should maybe use my foster faith that I just gained one? Gain a critical deed to foster faith. If I use my foster faith here, I can re-roll the die. But if I re-roll in a die, I'll not get just a critical deed to foster faith. Critical deeds, it's not impossible for me. I'm going to do something, anything, and try to get that critical deed, and I will foster faith. But I'm going to lose my plot armor, so for the rest of this episode today, I will not have my ability to change class, ignore first result to slain, or automatically pass a scourge, critical insight, or critical deed, all 3. But I'm going to roll on do something, anything. Now, I only get 1 dice there as a man of justice. Let me see that 1 die. A 6. My dice are with me. Thank you, Roll20. And +1 for destined status. I do a cunning act of doing something, anything. So when Walter Pousset wants to take away the major portion of my army, I'm able to counter that, the fact that he left us behind. There's still enough of us who survived the Battle of Sofia to know that this guy left us there while we had to stay and fight.
I called to my followers, charged them to give witness. Who was at Sofia, at the Battle of Darkness, when King Colomon's royal archers rained quarrels upon us? Several men stepped forward and raised hands, sergeants and captains, promoted after months of campaign warfare, not the least of which was Sofia. I pointed at the closest. I know you. The man smiled at being recognized. I did not start the day by your side, but I was there for the hard hand play. The man nodded, lowered his gaze. To be recognized by me was a claim for a lifetime. A cheer started for the heroes of Sofia. I reminded them all of the death of our archangels. Michael would not have stopped here. He was not trading one plow for another. He was a soldier, our soldier. Recall his shield, a relic of antiquity, honored, venerable. A cock does not sit on a nest. I had them already convinced, and to rally them further was overkill. I brought a froth to the mouth of several, screaming outrage that our quest would be so easily delayed, denied. Walter would have to rely on private guards. I'm not here for riches, for lands, for any title. I am a pilgrim. I need not be anything more. Some in the crowd were calling out Le Roi. I raised a hand and silenced them. Let us pray. I started the first line of the Our Father, and the chorus of the mob took over. Grown men rubbed eyes, concealing tears. My Peregrini Christi, the pox, were ready to find the next fight. God wills it.
So I convinced the men, continue the course. Most of the pox by now are bearded, naked rabble, frightening people to behold. So Walter Pousset probably looks most of our guys over, and maybe he even thinks that, well, because I took the money, they didn't have money to buy arms. I'm certainly not going to surrender any of that gold and pearls that I took, if he even has any of it left. But I've made my role of do something, anything here, and by doing so, I am able to circumvent that and move to the next part of my quest. At this time, the Sultan of the region was a 16-year-old, Kilij Arslan Ibn Suleiman. Now forgive me, that didn't flow off the tongue the way it should. And he was engaged in war with his rival Turks, a conflict that had already taken the life of his own father. Despite his many spies, the young Sultan was taken totally by surprise when we as foreign raiders turned up at the walls of his provincial capital of Nicaea. And of note, the Germans from hereafter are incorrectly called Frangi or Franks, and that term in the area soon evolves into a general Turkish and Arab term for just any foreigner. The Crusades are actually shaping the culture and the language of the area. So where do we get to from here? So the Turkish Sultan, he's upset that we are threatening his walled city, and so he sends forth a cavalry patrol to find and arrest our leaders. And he's not informed enough to know the number and size that he's dealing with. He may not even know that the Emperor Alexius has sent a secret correspondence off to the Pope. And as a 16-year-old, he would not be well-versed in the politics of the age, especially if he's fighting his own civil war with uncles and other rivals of former generals. We're going to roll dice on a pious quest. The Turkish light cavalry, they enter an area where they have to dismount to actually engage, and we're probably just going to cut them all to pieces because we have so many men now. Probably 70, 80,000 people are attacking this small force of 1,000 horsemen at most. Most of those 70,000 are just waiting in ambush. It's not like we're all going to rush out, but it's almost like a zombie attack. And only a few survivors of the assault of the cavalry will limp back. Well, let's see if I survive as well. So I'm going to roll. I'm back on my table here on my refs page, and I'm going to roll on Pious Quest to get my actual result, a 3. I'm going to defeat a die 6 fell ones to foster faith. I'm fostering faith all over, so I have a number of these that I've accumulated now, even though I've at times have forgotten them. What am I up to? A good old 5 that I can use to double up dice rolls. The tests of prowess, I need to defeat a die 6 fell ones here because my die 6 fell ones won. So it just goes to show this is sort of, here comes the flag. It's probably me just rushing into the battle just to have a little fun at the end. That's sort of sad. It's probably typical of the situation that as a former soldier, I too enjoy battle. So here comes my 2d6 on tests of prowess, and I rolled a 2 and a 5. Destined status, 5 becomes a 6. That 6 is mighty. I defeat all the fell ones. So even if there was 1, even if there was 100, I would have also defeated a Dark Knight or Circumventing Scourge, but neither of those here. And we have massacred the Turkish Sultan's forces on the outskirts of Nicaea.
There was silence. Even I held my breath. A banner was raised. The start and soon the ripple of many more shot up behind to relay the order, rise and rush. Yelling deafened, we hit the horsemen unprepared at walk gait, most without helmets, most unsure what was happening. The horse guards of Sultan Killage were ordered out to arrest a few brigands. How now can thousands upon thousands be held in bond? Reins were surrendered, riders unhorsed. To their credit, many dismounted and formed loose ranks. But upon hearing and seeing the enemy dissolve within swarming chaos, dismounted soldiers tried to get back to their pages, dutifully holding the mounts to the rear. Some managed to call above the thunder, form a circle, retreat to the rock ledges, make for the sea coast. Confusion. They would soon be dead. My frock blood-stained. Kills 60 soldiers. Splintered skulls for a false prince. Strode high on sundered shields. Our first real battle on the enemy, and we win. The pickings just seem easy. All our true soldiers are relieved by the fact that it was so easy, and maybe God again is with us after all. Our army was quite experienced at raiding villages. We learned all that moving through Serbia and Bulgaria. We fight in a hit and run when any Turk on horse are actually seen. We knew there was a larger Turkish army somewhere, but we just told ourselves that it was cowardly and stayed in Nicaea. That's present-day Iznik if you go to your Google Maps. It was actually, this larger army was elsewhere fighting the Civil War, but it's coming back to get to us. But that will be another episode. More later.